The train's whistle faded into the prairie wind, leaving behind a hush so heavy that even the cicadas seemed to pause. Dust drifted across the platform, curling around the boots of the small crowd that had come to witness the rare arrival of the eastbound locomotive. When the last echo of iron wheels vanished into the distance, Red Rock Crossing felt smaller again, as if the world had rolled up its horizon and left it to sleep under its own empty sky. Jedediah stood motionless long after the train was gone. His broad shoulders were stiff beneath the worn leather of his coat. His hat pulled low two-shade eyes that had seen too much sun and too little joy. The hand that held his daughter's small fingers trembled only slightly enough for Lily, the eldest, to notice. She glanced up, her dark curls catching the dying light, and whispered, "Pa, is she gonna stay?" Jedediah swallowed hard, his throat dry as old wood. "Reckon so," he said at last, voice low and cracked. "She's got nowhere else to go." The woman standing a few paces away, Ilara, did not look like she belonged to this place. The prairie wind tugged at her dress, lifting the hem to reveal travel-worn boots, the kind a lady from the city might wear only out of desperation. Her face, though smudged with soot and dust, carried a quiet grace that time and hardship had not erased. The lines around her eyes spoke not of vanity lost, but of something deeper, years of silence, regret, and a loneliness so profound it had hollowed her out. No one moved to greet her. The few townsfolk who'd lingered began to drift away, sensing something private, something raw, unfolding on the platform. The grocer's wife whispered to her husband, "That's her, the one he thought dead." The husband only grunted and tugged her away before gossip could spill where it wasn't welcome. Ilara's gaze never left Jedediah. "You've aged," she said quietly, the words carrying across the still air like a confession. He tipped his hat slightly, more habit than courtesy. "So've you?" Lily and Rose clung tighter to his legs. They didn't know this woman, not really. They knew her name. Their father had whispered it in dreams, sometimes in anger, sometimes in sorrow, but the face before them was a stranger's. Rose, the younger one, peeked out from behind her sister and whispered, "Is she?" Armand Jedediah didn't answer. He couldn't. His chest ached with the question, with the memory of nights he'd sworn that woman was buried in the past, gone with the floods, or lost to the sickness that swept through the camps to winter's back. Yet here she stood, flesh and bone, breathing the same air he did. It was easier to face ghosts when they stayed ghosts. Ilara took a tentative step forward, her hand lifting slightly before falling back to her side. "Jed," she said, her voice cracking on the single syllable. "I didn't know if you'd still be here." "Nowhere else to be," he muttered. "Land's all I got left." Silence stretched between them again, a taut, invisible wire strung with years of words unsaid. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the scent of iron, smoke, and distant rain. It was the smell of change, and Jedediah hated it. Finally, he motioned toward the wagon hitched near the fence. "Town'll be closing up soon. Best we get you settled." Ilara nodded, grateful for something to do, something that didn't require words. She followed him down the steps, her hands trembling as she lifted her small satchel, all that was left of a life once imagined, now folded and faded like old linens. Lily and Rose trailed behind, whispering to each other, their young minds struggling to understand the strange reunion. As the wagon creaked away from the station, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the prairie in long, bleeding streaks of crimson and gold. The land seemed endless, swallowing the road ahead in dust and memory. The ride back to the homestead was long and quiet. The horses' hooves beat a slow, steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. Jedediah kept his eyes fixed on the trail, the reins firm in his hands. He wanted to ask her where she'd been, how she'd survived, why she'd come back now, but the questions felt dangerous, like rattlesnakes underfoot. Best to wait, he told himself. Best to breathe. Ilara, sitting beside him, studied the horizon. She had dreamed of this land during the long nights on the road, the smell of sage, the hum of the wind, the endless stretch of sky. It had been her home once, before everything burned, before the fever, before she'd left to seek a cure that never came. But the land looked different now, harder, wilder, as if time itself had conspired to erase her from it. "You kept the place," she said softly, nodding toward the faint outline of the farmhouse in the distance. Jedediah grunted. "Didn't have much choice. Land don't take kindly to being abandoned." The words stung, though he hadn't meant them as a jab. Alara looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "I never wanted to leave, Jed. You know that." He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked as though he were chewing the bitterness back down. "You left anyway." They rode in silence the rest of the way. By the time they reached the farmhouse, dusk had settled deep over the plains. The windmill creaked lazily in the distance, and the scent of evening dew mixed with the dry smell of old timber. The house stood the same as she remembered: 2 rooms, a small porch, and the barn out back where Jed kept the horses. Yet it felt emptier somehow, as though the years had hollowed it out. Lily ran ahead to open the door, her little boots thumping across the porch. Rose hesitated by the wagon, glancing at Alara with wide, uncertain eyes. "Go on, Rosie," Jedediah said gently. "Ain't nothin' to be afraid of." Alara knelt, her voice soft but steady. "You must be Rose. You were just a baby when I left." The girl said nothing, just stared, torn between curiosity and fear. Alara's hand hovered midair before she let it drop. "You've got your father's eyes," she murmured, inside. The house smelled of cedar and smoke, comforting, familiar scents that pulled old memories to the surface. The mantel still held the carved wooden horse she'd given Jedediah the first winter after they'd wed. Dust covered it now, but it stood proudly, a relic of better times. Jedediah lit the lantern, the flickering light casting shadows across the room. "You can take the spare room," he said. "Ain't much, but it's clean." Alara smiled faintly. "It's more than I deserve." He paused in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by lamplight. "You said it, not me." The words hung between them like a blade. Alara flinched, but didn't reply. Instead, she placed her satchel on the small cot and ran her hand along the quilt, one she'd sewn herself years ago. The stitching still uneven, the pattern faded, but intact. He'd kept it. For all his anger, he hadn't thrown it away. Outside, the night deepened, and the prairie came alive with the soft hum of crickets and coyotes calling in the distance. Alara stood by the window, watching the moon rise over the plains. In its pale light, the land looked both strange and familiar, like a dream she'd stepped back into, but could no longer control. Later, after the children were asleep, Jedediah sat by the fire, his hat on the table beside him. The flames threw restless shadows across his face, highlighting the deep lines carved by years of sun and sorrow. Alara joined him quietly, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You never wrote," he said finally. "I tried." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Letters got lost. Or maybe you stopped looking." He stared into the fire. "You left after the fever took Eli, packed your things and went without a word. I spent months looking. Folks said they saw you heading east, maybe to Denver. Some said you'd died in the camps." "I almost did," she said, her eyes glistening. "But I couldn't stay. Not after what happened. Every corner of this land reminded me of him." Jedediah's jaw clenched. The name hung between them, Eli, their boy, buried on the hill behind the barn, beneath a cedar cross that leaned slightly now from years of wind. "You think it was easier for me?" he asked, voice rough. "I dug that grave myself. You weren't there." "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never stop regretting it." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. For the first time, it held something like truth. Jedediah leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the flames. "You comin' back now?" "Why?" Ilara hesitated. "Because I couldn't run anymore. Because I wanted to see them, our girls, before they forget what I looked like. Before they learn to hate me from stories." He looked up at her then, truly looked. The years had softened her edges, but deepened her eyes. There was pain there, but also something else, a quiet determination. A hope, he thought, long dead. "You think I can just let you back in?" he asked. "No," she said simply. "I just need a place to start." The wind rattled the window panes, and the fire crackled low. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Just two souls bound by loss and time. Sitting in the flickering half-light of memory, Jedediah finally sighed, rubbing a calloused hand across his face. "You can stay, for now, but don't expect things to be like they were." Ilara nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I don't. I just want to be here." He didn't answer, but the faintest flicker of something, not forgiveness. Not yet, but maybe the shadow of it crossed his expression. He rose, adjusted his hat, and turned toward the stairs. As his footsteps faded, Ilara looked once more toward the window. The moon hung high over the prairie, silver and cold. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, lonely, searching. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to breathe. The mornings in Red Rock Crossing always began the same, the sun rising slow and fierce over the horizon, the wind tugging at the dry grass, and the faraway cry of crows echoing across the plains. But for Ilara, each dawn felt different now, heavier, like the land itself was judging her for coming back. She woke early, before the girls stirred, before Jedediah came down from the loft. The kitchen was quiet, except for the creak of the old floorboards and the faint hiss of the kettle on the stove. She had once known every inch of this room, the way the morning light slanted through the window, the rhythm of the clock's tick, the smell of bread baking in the oven. Now it all felt distant, like memories she'd borrowed from another woman. She reached for the tin of coffee grounds and found it empty. A small, foolish thing, but it brought a lump to her throat. Jedediah used to tease her for always keeping a second stash hidden behind the flour bin. He must have forgotten that trick, or maybe he'd chosen to. When he finally came down, hat already in hand, he paused at the sight of her standing there, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, as if nothing had changed. "Didn't expect to see you up before the sun," he muttered, pouring water from the kettle into his cup. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The wind kept me awake." Jedediah grunted, the sound somewhere between agreement and dismissal. He took a sip, then leaned against the counter, his eyes on the window. "Gonna ride out to the south pasture today. Fence needs mendin'. Won't be back till late." She nodded. "Do you want me to cook supper?" He didn't look at her when he answered, "If you want." He left soon after, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. Ilara stood there, long after he'd gone, her hands trembling slightly as she set the empty cup aside. It wasn't anger that hollowed her out, it was the quiet indifference. The years apart had carved more than distance between them. They had built a wall. Lily and Rose woke with the sun, sleepy-eyed and curious. Ilara helped them dress, though. They kept their distance, whispering to each other when they thought she wasn't listening. Children were honest in their fear, too honest sometimes. "Your PA says you help with the chickens?" Ilara said as she followed them out to the yard. Lily nodded cautiously. "Pa lets me feed Em. Rose just likes watchin'." Rose frowned. "I do help." Ilara smiled, kneeling to scoop a handful of feed. "Then maybe we can both help today." She tossed the grains, watching the hens scurry, wings flapping, their squawks filling the air. Rose giggled despite herself, and for a fleeting moment, Ilara felt something ease in her chest. But the moment didn't last. When they went inside, Lily asked quietly, "Why did you go away?" The question hit like a bullet. Ilara froze, the spoon in her hand hovering above the pot. She began, then stopped. What could she say? That she'd run because the grief had been too much. That she'd looked at her son's empty bed and couldn't breathe. That she'd failed them all. I thought I could make things right, she said finally, her voice unsteady, but I was wrong. Lily stared at her a long moment, then turned away. Pa said we don't talk about the past. Ilara's heart twisted. Maybe your pa's right, she whispered. But sometimes, the past talks about us. By midday, the heat pressed down like a weight. Ilara worked in the garden, pulling weeds that had grown thick and stubborn in her absence. The soil was dry, cracked in places. It reminded her of her own heart, parched, yearning for something that might never come back. From the road came the sound of wheels and laughter. She looked up to see a wagon approaching Martha Calloway, the preacher's wife, with her usual brisk smile. Martha was one of the few who hadn't looked away at the station. She'd known Ilara years ago, before everything fell apart. Well, I'll be, Martha said, climbing down from the wagon. You're a sight I never thought I'd see again. Ilara wiped her hands on her apron, forcing a smile. Guess the Lord wasn't finished with me yet. Martha studied her a moment. Town's been buzzin' since you stepped off that train. Folks got long memories out here, Ilara. You'll have to walk gentle for a while. I figured as much. Martha's tone softened. Don't let it trouble you too much. People will talk. Then they'll find someone new to fuss about. They always do. Ilara smiled faintly. And Jedediah, hard man. That one, Martha said. But he's got a good heart, buried deep as it might be. Losing Eli broke something in him. You know that better than anyone. Ilara nodded, her throat tight. I do. Martha gave her a gentle pat on the arm. Well, you're back now. That counts for something. The rest'll come in time. That night, when Jedediah returned, the air between them was different, not softer, but less sharp. He smelled of sweat, leather, and dust, the scent of long labor. Supper waited on the table, stew, bread, and coffee that wasn't quite strong enough for his liking. But he ate in silence, which was more than she'd hoped for. Lily and Rose chattered about the chickens, about how Rose had named one of them Miss Peck. Jedediah grunted his amusement, his eyes flicking briefly to Ilara. It was a small thing, that glance, but it carried a sliver of something human, maybe memory, maybe mercy. After the girls were sent to bed, Ilara stayed by the fire, mending a torn shirt of his she'd found in the washroom. The thread slipped easily through her fingers. Her hands remembered the rhythm, even if her heart didn't. Jedediah sat across from her, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The rasping sound filled the silence between them. You saw Martha, he said after a long while. Ilara nodded. She stopped by, told me people haven't forgotten. He set the knife down, eyes narrowing. You surprised? No, she said quietly. But I hoped maybe time would dull their memory. Jedediah leaned back, the chair creaking. Time, don't forgive Ilara. It just makes folks quieter about their hurt. She met his gaze, unflinching. And you? Has time made you quiet, or just colder? His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might shout. But he only sighed, long and low. You think you can come back here and fix what's broke? You can't patch grief like a torn quilt. I'm not trying to fix it, she said, her voice trembling. I'm just trying to live with it. That silenced him. For a moment, the firelight danced between them like something alive, flickering with the ghosts of what once was. Then he rose and walked to the door, staring out into the night. Ilara, he said softly, his back to her. I buried a part of you the day we put Eli in the ground. I didn't expect you to come walking back to haunt me. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe I buried a part of myself too. He didn't turn. Maybe that's the problem. Days passed, and the uneasy rhythm of their new life took shape. Ilara tended the house, taught the girls their letters, and tried not to flinch when the townsfolk's whispers reached her ears. Jedediah worked longer hours, speaking little, though sometimes she caught him watching her from across the yard, eyes shadowed with something he couldn't name. One evening, as the storm clouds gathered over the plains, Lily came running inside, her dress soaked from the rain. "PA's still out by the fence," she cried. Without thinking, Ilara grabbed her shawl and ran into the storm. The wind howled, and lightning split the sky in blinding flashes. She found Jedediah by the south pasture, wrestling with a fallen post as the rain came down in sheets. "Jed," she shouted, struggling against the wind. "You'll get yourself killed out here." He turned, water streaming down his face. "Fence won't mend itself. Let it be. You can fix it tomorrow." He stared at her for a long moment, then let the post fall. The thunder rolled overhead as they trudged back to the barn, soaked to the bone. Inside, breathless and dripping, they stood facing each other, the storm's fury muffled by the walls. For the first time in years, he laughed, a low, rough sound that startled them both. "You always did have a way of yellin' sense into me." Ilara's laughter followed, soft but real, "and you always were too stubborn to listen." They stood there, smiling through the rain, the air between them no longer cold but charged with something fragile and alive. When the laughter faded, Jedediah's expression turned serious. "You shouldn't have come out here. Neither should you," she replied. "But we both did." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since her return, his gaze softened. The years of anger, of grief and silence, didn't vanish, but they shifted just enough for the faintest glimmer of forgiveness to show through the cracks. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, the past began quietly, uncertainly, to loosen its hold. The morning after the storm dawned clean and cold. The prairie glistened, washed new under the pale light. Puddles filled the ruts of the old road, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. The land, so often parched and unforgiving, seemed gentler now, though that peace didn't reach the farmhouse. Inside, the quiet was thick. Jedediah sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside him. Across from him, Ilara mended one of Rose's dresses, her hands moving with mechanical care. Neither spoke. The night's laughter, their brief truce in the barn, had vanished like a mirage at sunrise. "Finally," he said, "you still ain't told me the truth." Her needle paused mid-stitch. "About what?" "About why you left." His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes from wounds left open too long. "Not the talk you gave the girls. The real reason." Ilara set the dress aside. The light through the window fell across her face, revealing the deep weariness there. "You already know. Maybe I do, but I need to hear you say it." She folded her hands in her lap, the thread still clinging to her fingers. "After Eli died, I stopped seeing anything but him. I'd wake at night and swear I heard him crying. I'd look for him by the river, by the barn. I couldn't breathe in this house, Jed. Every room was a ghost." He stared at her, jaw tightening. "So you ran?" "I thought if I left, the pain would fade. I told myself I'd come back when I was stronger. But the world out there—" She shook her head. "It wasn't kind. I worked in kitchens, washed floors, slept in barns. I got sick for a time. By the time I found the will to come back, years had slipped away." Jedediah said nothing, his gaze locked on the grain of the table. "You could have sent word." "I did," she whispered. 3 letters. I sent them to the postmaster in Red Rock. Never heard back." He looked up then, eyes flashing. "Old Cal died that spring. Mail was lost for months." The truth settled between them like dust. All those years, the silence, the bitterness, built on a misunderstanding, buried by time and bad luck. Ilara felt her throat tighten. "Then you thought I was dead?" He nodded once. "Had to. Else I'd have gone mad." They sat in silence, the enormity of it pressing down on them. Outside, the wind stirred the wet grass, whispering through the eaves. The sound was soft, like a sigh from the earth itself. As days passed, the rhythm of life returned, but something had shifted. The tension between them wasn't gone, but it had changed shape, no longer sharp and cutting, but heavy, like an old scar aching before rain. Jedediah still spoke little, yet his eyes lingered on her longer now, not with anger, but with a wary kind of understanding. Ilara, too, began to find small places of peace. She baked again, the smell of bread filling the house. She read to the girls by lamplight, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier each night. The laughter of children, once a knife to her heart, became a balm instead. But Red Rock Crossing was not quick to forgive. Whispers followed her to the market, to the well, to church. Walked out on her man, they said, left her young'uns to fend for themselves. It stung, but she bore it quietly. The only judgment that mattered sat across from her at the supper table each night. Still, she could feel the weight in Jedediah's eyes, the question he hadn't asked yet, the one she feared most. And it came, as she knew it would, on a Sunday evening when the air hung still and the prairie glowed gold under the setting sun. He was fixing the wagon wheel by the barn, when he spoke without looking up. "You said you left 'cause you couldn't bear it here. But that ain't the whole of it, is it?" Ilara froze. "What do you mean? You're not a liar, Ilara, but you're good at hiding the truth. You were sick when you left, the kind of sick that don't always heal." She swallowed hard. "I was, but I got better." "You sure?" His voice softened. "You still look like you're fighting something." "I am," she said quietly, "but not sickness. Guilt." He put the wrench down and wiped his hands on a rag. "Guilt don't go away easy. You carry it, or it carries you." Ilara looked at him then, her eyes wet. "And which have you been doing, Jed?" He met her gaze, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Guess I've been letting it carry me a long while." That night, a wind rose again, not a storm, but a restless breeze that swept through the open window. Ilara lay awake, listening to it, thinking of all the words left unsaid. She rose quietly and stepped outside, the cool air brushing her face. The prairie stretched before her, endless and silver under the moon. Behind her, the door creaked. Jedediah stepped out, his shadow long across the yard. "You couldn't sleep either." "No," she said. "Seems the wind's got too many ghosts tonight." He stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've been thinking about Eli, about the day we buried him." She closed her eyes. "I think about it every day. I remember you holding him in that blanket. You wouldn't let go, even when the fever took him. You looked at me like I was the one who did it." Her voice cracked. "I needed someone to blame. You were there." He nodded slowly. "And I let you. Figured it was the least I could do." They stood in silence, the wind tugging at their clothes. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called, long and mournful. Jedediah took a deep breath. "You know, I never marked his grave proper. Just that old cross. Always meant to build something better. Couldn't bring myself to." Ilara turned toward him, eyes shining. "Then let's do it together. For him." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow." The next day was bright and clear, the sky a hard blue that seemed to stretch forever. They walked to the hill behind the barn, where the cedar cross leaned, half swallowed by grass. Lily and Rose followed, each carrying a small stone they'd painted with childish care. Jedediah brought his tools. Ilara carried a small box wrapped in linen. They worked in silence, side by side, as they'd once done in better years. Jedediah set the new wooden marker in the ground, carving Eli's name deep into the grain. Ilara placed the box at its base, a lock of their son's hair, a toy horse he'd carved from pine, and the tiny blue ribbon she'd tied around his wrist the day he was born. When it was done, the family stood together, the prairie wind moving through the grass like a slow tide. Lily slipped her hand into Ilara's, and Rose leaned against her father's leg. For the first time, they stood not as strangers bound by loss, but as a family bound by remembrance. Alara knelt, touching the cool earth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." Jedediah crouched beside her. "Ain't nothin'. To forgive the dead for Alara, the livin' that's harder." She looked at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Can you forgive me, Jed?" He didn't answer right away. The wind caught his hat brim, lifting it slightly before settling it again. "I don't know if I can forget," he said finally, "but maybe forgiving ain't about forgetting. Maybe it's about remembering different." He reached out then, hesitantly, and took her hand. His grip was rough, uncertain, but it held. Alara let out a shuddering breath, the first true release in years. That evening, the four of them sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. The land stretched endless before them, the same as it ever was, yet somehow changed. The light caught in Alara's hair, and Jedediah found himself studying her profile, the quiet strength in it. He realized then that he'd spent so long grieving the woman she used to be. He'd never seen the woman she'd become. "You reckon the girls will remember this place when they're grown?" she asked softly. "They will," he said. "It's in their blood." Alara smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's still something worth staying for." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Maybe there is." The air was still, except for the low hum of cicadas. In the distance, the train whistle echoed, faint, mournful, carried on the wind, the same sound that had brought her back. This time, it didn't feel like an ending, but a beginning. Jedediah reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't hesitate. They sat that way until the light faded and the stars came out one by one, scattered across the vast sky like forgotten prayers, finally finding their way home. Finally finding their way home.